why you should be a socialist in 2023. Now, I don't really identify as a socialist. If you're conservative, you'd probably call me a socialist because of the things I want for America: universal housing, universal healthcare, universal education, free access to food, things like that, which are social policies. But whether, a socialist economic organization, I'm not 100% sure. Let's see if this turns me into a card-carrying socialist. Let's go.
Episode and others like it are brought to you by the generous support of my patrons on Patreon. If you like my videos and you're looking for something a bit more fun and longer form, check out the podcast I run with Hakeem and Yugopnik. It's called The D Program, and we tackle all sorts of topics, from politics to culture to whatever the current thing is, and generally just have a good time. We recently passed the 1-year mark, so you've got plenty of episodes to binge. You can find the D Program on all your favorite platforms. Hey there. This is one of those videos that'll probably reach a bunch of new people, so if you're one of them, welcome to the channel. My name is JT, and I make videos about politics and culture from a socialist perspective. Now, I don't want this to sound like a politician's speech, so this video is going to be pretty direct. Many of the biggest problems in your life are either caused or worsened by capitalism. And the truth is, there are ways to solve these problems. Another world not just radically different.
I will say, right off the jump, I absolutely believe that the form of capitalism we're doing now is a huge problem. With that said, the reason I wouldn't call myself a socialist, one, I haven't read any socialist theory, but I think capitalism as a beast can be tamed. I think it can be controlled with strict regulation and developing strong social welfare safety nets. I think the people need to want this. But I think it can be something that can be achieved under a capitalist economic organization. With that said, I'm open to learning more about socialist economic systems. And I'm not going to say I'm a subject matter expert here, so don't take my word as law or anything. But that's kind of where I stand currently.
But better is actually possible. We've only experienced capitalism for a few hundred years at most. So it's not utopian to think the world could change and become a better place.
Could things be better under a socialist economic organization? Maybe. Even I'll say probably, coming from someone who doesn't know too much about it. I'll say probably, from what I've heard. But we could have things be way the fuck better currently under our capitalist system. This is the worst form of capitalism that we're currently under. It could be better without needing to completely overhaul our economic organization. That's kind of my opinion on this as well, expanding on it further.
And it's not being bitter or ungrateful to critique it in its present state. It's normal. Things are bad, we know why, and we can fix them. Capitalism has had its time in the sun, and someday it will end. And it should. Just as humanity progressed from feudalism to capitalism, so too will we move on from capitalism to socialism. Our whole purpose, when you really boil it down, is to leave a better future for our children. And handing them down a broken, rapidly imploding capitalism isn't going to achieve that. So let's take a quick look at what's wrong with capitalism and why it's time to accept that we should move on.
What's wrong with capitalism is all the capital goes to the top. Now, with regulation and people, workers, organizing more in the form of unions as one way you can do it, you can have a much better system. Well, that's still technically capitalistic, I think, but we'll see.
Over the course of the pandemic, the 10 richest people in the world doubled their wealth, while the income of the bottom 99% of humanity fell. $700 billion shared between just 10 people turned into $1.5 trillion in only 2 years, at a rate of $1.3 billion every single day, or 15 grand per second. In less time than this sentence has taken to read out, they raked in your yearly salary, and together own more than the world's poorest 4 billion people. No one needs this reminder, but the pandemic was, and still is, brutal. In just the first year, millions of people died, and the lives of millions more got a lot harder overnight. Nearly 100 million additional people fell below $1.90 a day during the pandemic. Millions of essential workers were forced back to work while their bosses bet on how many of them would get COVID. and millions of people were laid off without warning and with just 2 miserable checks to stretch out and make last over 2 years. While the vast majority of humanity was suffering through the crisis, being told to go back to work and risk death to save the economy, or generously offered the alternative of starving at home, a handful of people with unfathomable power and privilege profited off the chaos, hoarding the wealth that could have changed the lives of the millions of people they share a planet with. These 10 multi-billionaires made so much money, both before and during the pandemic, that even if they lost 99.99% of their wealth today, they'd still be richer than 99% of all the people on Earth. That's Blade Runner levels of wealth inequality, or altered carbon,
Probably
or
worse.
Elysium. Take your pick of dystopian movies we all agree show an untenable future, that's what we have. Many of us just don't recognize it without the cyberpunk aesthetic. Instead, this is our
That's
aesthetic, which frankly is even more depressing. What the pandemic showed, more clearly than ever before, is that this is not a system that works. A system where the immense wealth of a few people comes from the suffering of everyone else, and by its accumulation, actively prevents them from living a decent life needs to be done away with. And we've known this for a long time.
But again, I think that you can solve these issues via regulation, via expanding social safety nets, social welfare. Like I do think that, because we do that already. Like, we do make up for the horrific, like, monstrosity that is the free market via regulation. Because if we had an actual free market, companies just probably wouldn't pay us. You know what I mean? Under the free market, we had child labor, and we needed a government to step in and regulate that away. So that is what the free market gets you without regulation. Now, that's not to say, like, I don't see the benefits of, like, a market system. To me, there are certain benefits that do make sense. But they need to be regulated, or else they're going to fuck us over. And they're still fucking us over. They're fucking us over in some ways less than they used to, but in some ways more than they used to as well. But I do think that these issues can be regulated away. I do believe that.
As Albert Einstein wrote in his essay, Why Socialism? Capitalism is trapping us in the predatory phase of development and preventing us from transitioning into the collaborative phase of human progress. While capitalism has certainly improved many aspects of human life compared to what it used to be like under feudalism, it has done so on the terms of exploitation, coercion by an unaccountable few, and the total destruction of our ecosystems. Capitalism is an improvement, yes, for some, but a deeply contestable one. And we desperately need to get out of it. Because what Einstein could not imagine back when he wrote his case for socialism in 1949 is how much worse and even more predatory capitalism would become in the following 70 years. Nowadays...
Yeah, I want to say in my previous point, I wasn't trying to say, like, capitalism has gotten better in the last few years, or in the last, like, few decades. It definitely hasn't. More capital, more wealth has gone to the top, and less has trickled down. Because, trickle down economics is not real. But we do have some regulations against, like I said, child labor that we didn't have before. So that's why I think, it can be a beast that can be regulated. But we'll see.
45% of all new wealth created goes directly to the top 1%
fucking
of the
absurd,
population.
dude.
CEOs of large corporations make over 350.
I mean, that's horrific and wrong, but I think it can be regulated. That's kind of my point.
Times what their workers do. And all the while, employee wages are lower than they were 50 years ago when you account for inflation.
Holy shit, dude.
And I don't care how hard they work.
That's so
No one
fucked
works
up.
350 times harder
There's a
than
Bernie
anyone
Sanders
else.
quote? Hell yeah.
But I could almost forgive it if half of all Americans didn't live paycheck to paycheck, or if a $50 trillion transfer of wealth hadn't gone from the bottom 90% of society to the top 1% since 1975.
Yeah.
But they do, and it has. And it's not just wages, it's everything else too. 28 million Americans don't get any paid vacation or paid holidays, so they
That's
hardly take any time off.
insane,
And
dude.
who can blame them? When wages don't even keep up with inflation
we are
and most
so
people
shitty
can't
to
cover
labor.
a surprise $400 expense, it's simply not possible to take time off. And that's hardly surprising for a country that also has no federal guaranteed paid parental leave whatsoever. It's not just that we're getting paid less,
That one hits
getting a
close to home
smaller
for
share
me.
of the wealth we produce, and enriching a single % of the population despite living in the most productive time in human history. We're working more for less.
This is all true.
And on a related note, the gender pay gap makes that even more true for about half the population. Still to this day,
That's not
women
true, brother.
make 84
There's no
cents
gender
to
pay
a
gap.
man's dollar, and that number only gets worse for women of color. While the reasons for all these statistics are certainly varied, they all find their root or their excess in capitalism and its logic. All of these statistics are perfectly in line with the prime directive of our current economic model, the accumulation of profit for the capitalist class. They are all justified by the fact that in some way they have allowed for a small minority of the population, incredibly powerful and wealthy by virtue of its ownership of the means of production and nothing else, to squeeze more out of their workers for their own benefit.
Yeah.
In the last century,
I
we've
agree
seen
with
the
all that.
gradual destruction of unions, a federal tolerance of permanent high unemployment, and a series of successive changes to the tax system that together allow more and more wealth to accumulate at the top with these owners of economic.
It's all true. It's all absolutely true. Which, like, the erosion of regulations is a huge problem, but those regulations existed at one point, so they can exist again. A big part of it is, and I say this all the time, we need a smart population that's capable of making good decisions for themselves and voting in ways that don't fuck themselves over. But that's not where we're at. Americans, both Republicans and Democrats, consistently vote from an economic perspective to fuck themselves over. It's kind of all we do, because I said this earlier in the stream. When it comes to economic policy, I'm a both sides Andy. The Democrats and Republicans are exactly the same. They are neoliberal forces who operate at the behest of capital, and that's it. From a social perspective, the Democrats are obviously better, significantly better, in the sense that they're not actively trying to murder every trans person, but still, from an economic perspective, they are one and the same.
Like property. Wealth is more concentrated, we're more overworked, and rampant inequality persists because this economic system has no mechanism to fix these problems.
Boom, I disagree. That's a big blanket statement that I absolutely disagree with. Regulation. Like, if we the people are like, no, we need a wealth cap, we can vote one in. If we the people go, we need to raise taxes on the rich, we can raise those taxes. We can get that money and distribute it to ourselves. But the problem is, we don't want that. Now, why don't we want that? Now, obviously, this is where propaganda comes in. And we're talking decades and decades of anti-socialist propaganda that make like taxes demonized to like 75% of Americans. The idea of raising taxes for anyone, including the ultra rich, is already a losing battle. Like, it's like trying to roll a stone uphill, like trying to argue why some people should be taxed to Americans. It's incredibly difficult. That's anyway.
On the contrary, it thrives on their existence. What capitalism demands above all else is profit. And in order for the system to be profitable, someone needs to get screwed over, and it certainly won't be those with the executive power to set the rules. Think of it like this. No boss out there, however compassionate and kind-hearted they are, will ever pay their employee an equal or greater amount than they bring to the company. It wouldn't make sense. What would be the point of hiring an extra person if all the money they generate goes right back in their pocket? In other words, no matter what your pay is, even if it seems incredibly generous, it's less than what you're actually worth to the company.
Yeah, I generally agree with this. I mean, some of the way he's framing it, maybe not. Like the idea that like they're taking, I don't know, half. I don't know. This is kind of, it's hard to quantify, I guess. Maybe it is just $1 they're taking off the top. Maybe it is possibly even more that they're taking off the top. This is obviously a simplified version of whatever he's trying to convey, but that is standing out to me a little bit here.
And the money taken off the top, your surplus value, isn't going to a company fund or R&D or a collective pension scheme. Nothing that benefits.
That's true. No matter how many dollars there was there, that is true. It is just going to this guy.
Benefits you or your coworkers even indirectly. No, it's going to the shareholders. Otherwise, there'd be no profit, only expenses and income. This is the fundamental truth of capitalism. The employee-employer relationship is always in favor of the employer. Because when it isn't, companies aren't profitable, and that's a big no-no under capitalism. And the rest of the economy is there to facilitate that. A consistent so-called natural unemployment and a minimum wage that hasn't budged in almost 15 years together gives your boss the ability to replace you at any time. It keeps you compliant to their power under threat of poverty. And it gives them leverage to steadily increase that gap between how much money you bring the company and how much you get paid. Okay, for a lot of you, that was probably pretty frustrating. I can hear you saying, well, yeah, it sucks, but how else would a business function? It's just common sense it has to be this way or the economy wouldn't work. And that right there is the point. It's not that the economy wouldn't work, it's that a capitalist economy wouldn't work. So what about socialism? Socialists have a different perspective on how to organize society. To summarize, capitalists and capitalism's advocates believe that society is best served by a market-based economy, coupled with a society divided into two classes. One that owns and controls the productive enterprises and seeks profit, and one that does not own this form of property.
Maybe I'm less in favor of capitalism and more in favor of a market. Because I guess my issue with socialism and like communism is like, how do you determine what labor needs to get done? Like, and to me, like the market, you know, supply, demand, what people want, what people need, that feels like a good way to inform what labor needs to get done. But this idea of like there being a 1% ruling class and like 99% working class, like this I fundamentally disagree with. So does that make me a socialist? I don't know. Tell me in the comments, and be sure to like and subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube.
And therefore needs to sell its labor power for a wage. Ultimately, proponents of capitalism believe this leads to the greatest possible good because, in their opinion, markets, even when they're imperfect, are better at making decisions than democracy is.
I mean, isn't the market like a form of democracy? Kind of? Like, I feel like it kind of is functionally. Like, you're voting with your wallet, right? Like, I don't know.
Socialists disagree. We know that markets follow the money, not the collective good. And it's not hard to see how a society with such staggering inequality might interpret that fact. We know there's no such thing as a perfect market or a perfectly rational consumer. We know
that's the big one for me. And that's why, I don't know. Yeah, like there is no perfectly rational consumer. I absolutely agree with that.
That given enough time, competition always means monopolies. And we know that even if none of this were true, the whole capitalist system would still be built on a small group of unelected people having more power than the vast majority of the population and using it to enrich themselves. So, what do socialists propose instead? Well, first, let me just take 1 second to clarify a few things we do not propose, because I get these comments every week. We do not call for a state-mandated all-gray wardrobe, or for every person to have exactly the same amount of stuff. That's a very misguided notion of what socialism is about. When we use words like equality, we're not talking about forcing sameness in every regard. We're talking about making sure that everyone is afforded the same baseline standard of living. That's it.
I agree with that. Absolutely. I believe there should be a baseline standard of living provided by, in my view, the government, the state. So does that make me a socialist? I don't think so, right?
It's not a cap, it's a basic guarantee. Individuality,
I agree with
personal
that.
expression, the drive to do or become more, none of that will change. That's the best part about being human, and socialists are all about it. Now, let's talk specifics. A guaranteed standard of living. What does that mean? Universally free, or at the very least universally accessible, housing, education, food, water, and healthcare for all.
100 billion% on board with that. Unquestionably, I believe in that. But I think it can be achieved under a capitalist economic organization. It just needs to be regulated that way. And like a lot of those already exist to an extent. And looking at places like Scandinavia, a lot of those things exist to a greater extent than exist in the United States. I mean, that's putting it lightly. So the point is, these things can exist under capitalism. We see it in practice today. We just need more of it, a lot more, in my opinion. But it is doable.
The right to a life of dignity and basic security, because those things are...
I thought that was Margot Robbie at first. Right here. Doesn't that look like Margot Robbie? The like mom here or whatever. Looking for longer than like a second, I could tell it's not her. But for a split second, it looks just like her.
Basic security, because those things are well within our means by every measure available. There's too much food going to waste, too many empty houses, too much stuff being destroyed to artificially inflate its cost, and too many people making a profit by hoarding our basic needs.
All true.
Socialists
All
are
true.
tired of people being pushed into grueling, punishing, or demeaning jobs by being threatened with eviction, starvation, or death by disease. Thanks to modern...
Absolutely. My only hang up here is I think this can still be achieved under a capitalist economic organization. That's all he has not said that. He has not argued against that technically.
In technology, humanity has greater material prosperity than ever before. Why are we so intent on wasting it by keeping it locked away? It's not hard to imagine a world that works on positive incentives instead of negative ones. The knowledge that your livelihood is secure is a way better incentive to try new things than the threat of losing everything.
Abso-fucking-lutely.
The second thing socialists propose is democratic control over the means of production.
Okay. Excuse me. If he's describing like to be a socialist, you need to have these whatever 3 things. I don't know however many things he's going to say. Pillar one is universal basic, like everything. I absolutely agree with. Pillar 1, I'm fully on the side of the socialists here. Here's where the wheels fall off for me a little bit. I believe in more workplace democracy as a general rule, like unions, things like that. I'm absolutely in favor of. But whether every business will work best as a co-op, or if all means of production needs to be owned equally, which is I think what some socialists want. That's where, again, I need to read more. Like, I need to learn more about what this would look like, what this would mean, because frankly, I don't know I don't have all the facts. So I'm not saying, I'm tiptoeing around here, but I'm not trying to say one way or another. I'm just saying this is where I still have questions. And so videos like this are definitely enlightening me and answering a lot of the questions I do have. But this in particular is one place where I'm still a little bit, I'm going to say iffy, but let's go.
Large companies, factories, farms, things like that. Basically, an economy run democratically and not in the search of profit. This can take many forms, be it a centrally planned economy, a network of autonomous communes, maybe some kind of socialist market system even. It's not clear what option or combination of options.
And this is like where it again becomes like really, really difficult for like socialists to explain their messaging to people like me who already are incredibly open to socialism without calling themselves socialists. But trying to explain this to someone who's not open to socialism, like, there's so much nuance to what he just said. Like, there's no one way to do socialism is kind of what he's saying here. No one way to democratize, workplaces. No one way to give the people power over the means of production. So trying to explain that is incredibly difficult. Whereas with capitalism, there is not a lot of nuance to it as an economic organization, right? Like you've got someone owns the business and they have employees. That's it. There's no nuance. There's nothing more to explain. Whereas with socialism, it's incredibly nuanced, and people don't like nuance. I'm not trying to say I'm better than that, but people don't like nuance. It's difficult. It's hard to like explain nuance, which is difficult for him to do. Like I'm not saying he doesn't do it well. He does a great job. I love this channel, but I'm not saying it's. I would not imagine it's easy. It comes easy, but it's significantly more difficult for like a normie to understand what he's trying to say, no matter how well he articulates it. Yeah, that's kind of my point.
Options will work best for different parts of the world. What is clear is that they would all work better. Workplaces could be run either without a boss or with one elected by the workers. And the products of this economy would be geared towards satisfying the needs and wants of society without also having to be profitable. In other words, it's an economy run without that artificial barrier.
That sounds pretty good to me, actually. What he just said right there, where like you're creating stuff to help society, to help people, rather than doing it for profit. That sounds better to me than what we're doing now. So again, if that makes me a socialism, then sign me. If that makes me a socialism, what the fuck? If that makes me a socialist, then sign me up. But still got a lot to learn. Here, I'm gonna fix my camera.
Barrier imposed by a privileged group taking a cut off the top. If you're having a hard time imagining what a democratic workplace would look like, just think about your current job. I'll take retail as a common example. I used to work at Best Buy as a camera expert. My job, on paper, was to help customers pick the camera that would best suit their needs. In reality, management just wanted me to upsell people on more expensive gear. To make a long story short, the camera department is kind of detached from Best Buy proper. We technically reported to the respective brands, and we didn't have a brand manager there most of the time. When left to our own devices, the camera department had the lowest rate of product returns in the store by far, because we decided amongst ourselves how best to meet the customer's needs. When corporate started pressing us for higher profits and the GM started forcing us to upsell, the return rate skyrocketed, actual profits shrank, and the department got all kinds of negative reviews. In this scenario, and countless others across the labor landscape, the workers know how best to do their jobs, and meddling from an unelected manager only makes things worse.
Yeah, I could see that for a company like this, but like I work at like an app startup. And like my boss, he like he built this app from like the ground up. Like it's his product. I handle marketing, but I don't know how much more power I should have. But yeah, whether every company would function well as a co-op, that's another place where I'm a little bit, I'm hung up, you know? Something like that Best Buy example, that makes significantly more sense to me. But looking at like other types or like a factory, things like that, like that's where the example makes sense. But something like an app startup, like I said, that I work at, I don't know. I don't know if that needs to be a co-op necessarily.
Democracy in the workplace increases efficiency and morale and reduces waste. It's a no-brainer. Anyway, those are some basic propositions socialists
But I generally agree with more workplace democracy as a general rule. I absolutely do believe that.
have for how to change the world for the better, but we'll be the first to admit that they have their limitations. For example, some amount of inequality will still exist in this society, almost inevitably, be it in the political, social, or the economic sphere. Things can always be more egalitarian, and there's no doubt that with the proper institutions and societal commitment to egalitarianism, socialism will tend towards that goal. But it won't ever be ideal,
I agree with that.
only consistently improving. Some people will be more popular, find self-serving exploits, or may still make 5 times as much as someone else. But not only will this be more strongly resisted by a society that is democratic through and through, instead of nominally democratic in politics and hierarchical in the economy, a 5 times difference in compensation is hardly anything compared to the...
Yeah, if socialists are cool with a 5 times difference in compensation, I'm cool with that too. I would be totally fine if we made that the cap, like in our current system today. And my hang up here is I think we could technically do that. We could keep our current economic system and just regulate the issues out. That's what I said this 100 times in this video already. I'm kind of reiterating my point here. But I think we could do that now. Just make a law. Boom. You can't earn more than 5 times. My significant other said this. My girlfriend said this the other day. Boom. Make a regulation. Make a cap. You can't earn more than 10 times, 5 times, whatever, what your lowest paid employee earns. Done. I'm more than happy to do that. But we can do that via laws and regulation. So does that make me a socialist? I feel like I've said this like 4 times in this video. Does my want for this make me a socialist? I don't know. Anyway.
350 times higher income of an average
that's fucked
CEO.
up. That's
or
disgusting.
the million times higher income of the world's multi-billionaires we have today.
Yeah. Unbelievably fucked up. Unfathomably bad. I do not advocate for that one bit. When I say maybe capitalism can be tamed, I'm not saying it should look anywhere how it looks like today with this sort of BS happening.
Equality will undoubtedly make massive strides under a socialist system. And this does not come at the cost of freedom. A century of Red Scare rhetoric has welded the word socialism to the idea of unfreedom in most people's minds, but that is not a feature of socialist thought or practice. Socialists only care to abolish one freedom that exists in our current society, which is the freedom to exploit others. Or in other words, the freedom to take it away from someone else. Everything else, all the freedoms that make life worth living, those aren't going anywhere. On the contrary, with the boot of capitalism off your neck, you will be more able to enjoy freedom in every sense of the word. Personal, spiritual, economic, everything. To quote Eugene Debs, one of the most famous American socialists, socialism is merely an extension of the ideal of democracy into the economic field.
That makes sense.
And socialism is not so much a cut and dried program as it is a method by which industry is to be operated. It does not say what it will do or what you shall do, but only that the people, the workers and producers, shall be the master of themselves. And you know what? Things won't be perfect. They never are. Socialism will come with new problems, many of which we've probably never even thought of. But it will also come with a better way to solve them. When we face a problem today, something important like climate change, for example, our solutions not only need to be filtered by what will either be most profitable or, at best, hurt profits the least, but also the actual decisions over what solutions we do adopt are ultimately made by industries kept out of democratic control. Under capitalism, no government, no scientific board, no body of citizens really has the power to step to the fossil fuel industry. Under socialism, under a democratic economy, a climate change level decision may still be incredibly hard to make, but most people care more about still having a planet to live on than making the numbers on the screen go up every year.
Do they though? Because we vote for people who, like, go against the scientific consensus on climate change. Like, I don't know. Like, if we do that now, like, I don't know. I don't agree with his statement there.
And this way, they'll actually have the power to make that decision a reality. That is what
We have that power now. We could make climate change a reality. I guess well, okay, I'll take back what he said. I guess maybe his broader point, maybe I misheard or he didn't articulate it as well as maybe he could have. Because so much wealth and capital have accumulated to the top, that's given the people who have an interest in not solving climate change more money and power, and so they are able to exercise that influence in ways that causes voters to vote against their interests here. Maybe that's what he's trying to say. I don't know.
Socialists offer a more dignified life and the democratization of power. And the only thing it will cost us is giving up on the outdated idea that there is always a profit-driven solution to our problems. There isn't.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, profit, that's the profit motive I have a lot of issues with, for sure. To me, it is sort of a double-edged sword to where I think the profit motive can make people do great things. I do believe that. If you're motivated by a lot of money, you can do great things, like I just said. But the other edge of that sword is it can cause you to be extremely exploitative. So, I don't know.
And we can do better. As one final thought before you go, let me just be as open as I can here. I don't make these videos to win clout online. I'm not trying to trick you with clever rhetoric or even really convince you to see my perspective. I make these videos because I genuinely believe that this is the way forward. It's time. Deep down, we all know something has to change. I could sell out and make a Why I Left the Left video and get handed a multi-million-dollar conservative talk show today.
Do it, dude. Do it. Get the bag. I can't wait to do that. After I build up my YouTube channel and Twitch stream, I'm gonna do that. I clip this. Someone in the future clip this. When I become a reactionary Fox News commentator, a la Tulsi Gabbard, clip this, because this is my plan. This is my plan from the jump. I'm pretending to be a progressive. I'm pretending to be leftist. Okay, clip this.
I'd be set for life. My kids would be set for life. But I cannot do that because with every fiber of my being, I believe that socialism is the only way forward for humanity. It is moral. It is just. At this point, it's just common sense. We have the data. We just have a lot of work to do deprogramming ourselves from a century of Red Scare propaganda. Anyway, I hope that maybe some of this video has resonated with you and that you'll start asking questions about socialism yourself. If you do, I've got a bunch of other videos exploring all sorts of topics. We can do this. We can build the world we deserve. You should be a socialist. I mentioned at the beginning of this video that episodes like these are supported by viewers like...
I'm inching more and more. Like at some point I will probably be one, but I think I gotta read more theory. Excuse me, I've gotta read any theory, okay? The closest I've gotten to any sort of real socialist theory is watching this video. Or watching Hassan Piker. That's as close as I've gotten to any real genuine socialist, communist, Marxist theory. Which is why I can't in good faith call myself a socialist right now. But I definitely empathize with a lot that socialists want. There's a lot of overlap in the things that we want for the world. And so, I don't know, I think I'm getting there. So yeah, great video, as always. Definitely learning a lot from this guy. And hope he keeps making stuff.